And now Superintendent Barresi.
Thank you, Representative Kern. Appreciate that. And once again, thank you to Senator Rich Crandall. I also want to clear up a misconception. This is a state-led voluntary effort. This is not mandated by the federal government. In order to get federal assistance, Oklahoma is not required to adopt the Common Core. But in order to win federal grants that are being offered by the federal government, Oklahoma, as every state, is required to show evidence that we have rigorous college preparatory level preparation style standards that will be benchmarked nationally. There's also been some comments about the cost of implementation. Oklahoma is currently involved in implementation of the Common Core. That work is ongoing right now. As a matter of fact, ladies and gentlemen, I'm pleased to say that 40 school districts in the state of Oklahoma currently are utilizing the Common Core within their classrooms. And we get some very positive reports back about that. So let's drill down just a little bit and talk about some of the items on the Common Core, because some disparity has been raised about what is in the Common Core and what those standards do. Let's talk about, for instance, let's talk about mathematics, because it was alleged that it was fuzzy mathematics. So let's go into perhaps a 5th grade mathematics class. And it's talking about students learning to compute averages, because the Common Core does two things. It addresses content and it addresses the development of cognitive skills, of those thinking skills. That is something that is sorely missing in Oklahoma's past standards right now. Our standards are broad and they're narrow. And what they do is they drive teachers into drill work. They drive teachers into drilling for tests that are just level 1 depth of knowledge tests, which is simply recall. There is no testing of a child's cognitive skills, and that is one of the key issues, key factors that are important in employing Oklahomans of the future. So the Common Core presents very important content and also development of cognitive skills. So let's talk about mathematics. You might see a problem presented to students that will show you a table of a long jump competition. And they would list the long jump trials of 4 individuals that were trying to qualify for the state meet. And they would go across 5 trials on that broad jump. And just to see who would best qualify to be in the state meet. And so the question is who should we select to represent our school district in the state long jump competition? They're going to take an average. And the best average will win. That's the content. Let's talk about the cognitive skills. Then the teacher backs up and says, okay, that's the best average. What if we want to go for the gold? What if we want to make sure our chances of winning are right there? That leads the student back to looking at the table and realizing that one individual had 2 outstanding jumps that were far better than anyone else's, but had 3 down here that were mediocre or poor. And she would lead a discussion, or he would lead a discussion about the merits of making a decision about possibly getting more coaches or getting a better coach for this student so they can come up to the level and be able to compete consistently across those lines. Which one of them will help us bring home the silver medal? It still isn't the one with the best average. Do you see the discussion and the debate begins, and the cognitive skills come in? They know the content, but they have a chance to think about it, to look at the data, to interpret the data several different ways. Let's talk about social studies and literacy for social studies, because these standards are about English, language arts, and mathematics, and literacy across subject matter. Let's talk about, in 8th grade, students are studying the Gettysburg Address. Currently, with Oklahoma's past standards, those students might be led to memorize the Gettysburg Address and recite it back. Then we would have to move on and talk about other Civil War issues, because there's just not enough time. What the Common Core does is it narrows it down, but it goes deeper. So one teacher then could actually spend 3 days on the Gettysburg Address. That teacher would present content, which is the Gettysburg Address itself, about the events leading up to it in the Civil War, and how Lincoln came to the point of delivering that address. But then that teacher would begin a discussion about why Lincoln used the word dedicated 6 times in the Gettysburg Address. Each of those with a different meaning, 2 of them with biblical reference. The teacher would then ask on another day for a debate on 2 sides of the issue around the use of the word dedicated in 2 different ways. The teacher could then ask the students to write an essay based on facts, using facts, not opinion, but opinion that would have to be backed up by facts on issues surrounding the delivery of the Gettysburg Address. That's what I'm talking about. That's why it led a teacher to come up to me and say, we are so excited about the Common Core we've implemented in our district. This is why I got into teaching. I can now teach. I can now inspire. I can now lead. And I can tell you, superintendents tell me the same thing. The teachers understand now how our new teacher and leader effectiveness system that was mandated by this body will feed in and will allow them to become stronger teachers under the Common Core. They understand how our data system will yield data that will help them drive decisions as they make critical decisions on how to implement their homegrown curricula within their district. They're not so afraid of the A through F grading system that this body passed, because they now feel that they're gaining the tools to be able to develop excellence within their students. I haven't mentioned it. It's been raised about the cost of implementation of the Common Core. Oklahoma is currently in the process of implementation. Have you seen a budget item last year? And you won't see a budget item this year requesting additional money for implementation of the Common Core. It will not be asked in this year's budget. We are doing an independent effort at helping to implement that. These are standards that are so important that our students learn. But let's talk about making these Oklahomas. Because as I said, Jana Rowland was involved in the writing of the science standards. In Oklahoma last year, based on our past standards, just adopted revised science standards. And I'm very proud of those science standards for content. They very much beef up physics. We had a robust public comment session, and I asked everyone in this room to review those standards because I'm very proud of them. And and she based those based on her work with the Common Core, but she knew we would want to make them Oklahomas. And I'm very pleased, and I will put them up against those common standards. But they need to be presented within the context of the Common Core, because literacy will be addressed within that. That both delivers content, which is very important and beefed up, but also develops cognitive skills. Let's talk about social studies. Right now, as we speak, State Department of Education, our state history standards are being reviewed and upgraded. Those are the past standards for content. Again, keeping in mind the Common Core, narrower, deeper, content, cognitive skills. Those are being reviewed. But as a conservative Oklahoman, one is concerned about our students developing skills in their knowledge of history and in their appreciation of their unique position as a citizen of the United States. And what I'm concerned about was the lack of real focus on our national heritage and our government, I have asked Dr. Rufus Fears and Mr. David Barton to participate in those reviews. And I'm so very pleased to tell you that they both agreed, and they were both involved, and we appreciate their participation. And I know that when those are put out to public comment, we will do so proudly, and we'll appreciate your comment as well. You know, there are so many things that I could address that were misrepresented in the past presentation. Implication that possibly Carl Springer it was implied, not developed directly, that he might not be a supporter. I can tell you from his lips to my ears how much he does support the Common Core and how much he appreciates that effort. Another statement about Massachusetts. Well, the chief of Massachusetts, my counterpart, is the president of the Park Consortium in developing our common assessments. Indeed, Oklahoma is on the governing board of Park. Now, the government gave out the money because they wanted competition on those common assessments. They wanted input from all the states about what's important for the states. Oklahoma was not on the governing board. Governor Fallon signed the MOU for Oklahoma to join the governing board. Because of the landmark work done in this state on aggressive reforms, I was invited to be on the executive committee. I was just on a conference call this morning. Weekly, I'm on conference calls. Oklahoma is putting Oklahoma's stamp on that examination. In addition, I'm so very pleased that Mr. Alex Pettit, the state IT director, is currently serving on a procurement committee regarding the technology platform upon which that test will be presented. And we will put other Oklahomans on those procurement committees that will be making those tough decisions regarding procurement. Oklahoma is putting Oklahoma's stamp on common assessments. So I think there's so many other things that I'd like to say, but let me just do this. Let me just close and be open for questions. I also want to advise the committee that we have other experts in the field with us today that are ready to answer your questions. Ms. Sarah Ann or Sally Beach, Dr. Beach, is Professor of Literacy Education and Director of the Ribby Grant Reading Research Initiative. Stacy Reeder, Dr. Stacy Reeder, Associate Professor of Mathematics Education, is here as well. And Dr. Jean Cate, who's the Associate Director of the K-20 Center of Education and Community Renewal, is also here today. And just as Senator Crandall mentioned to you that Park was coming out to review and work with higher ed about their attitudes about national examinations, I want you to know that Park will be in Oklahoma working with higher ed. I believe it's October 31st, Dr. Stewart? October 31st to do the same thing. So thank you very much for your attention, and we're all ready to answer your questions.
Thank you so much, and we will now take questions, and Representative Kern, you are first.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a few questions. Dr. Barresi, you mentioned that Common Core standards are not mandated by the federal government.
Will you speak into the mic, please? Thank you.
Ma'am. You mentioned that Common Core standards are not mandated by the federal government, and yet in September of this year, in order to get a waiver, you have to accept Common Core standards. Tell me how that is not a mandate. Then I'd also like to ask, say you keep mentioning homegrown curriculum. We only get 15% that we can add on to the 100%. You mentioned a number of things. When do we use up our 15%? Also, can we not, as Oklahomans, develop our own teacher skills? Do we not already have information of programs doing that? And 15%, do you think 15% is really local control? And I don't mean to be rude, but I would like to say I've been in a number of interim studies over the years, and very few times have presenters been insulted by another presenter. And I do not appreciate your condescending attitude that you gave toward my presenters. We're presenting both sides of the issue, and that's what this discussion is all about. You don't have to try to insult us to make your point.
Well, Representative Kern, if I seem to be insulting, I definitely apologize to your presenters. But just as I said, I'm very concerned in the past year to 2 years that there seems to be really a confusion of the facts. And so I'm going to try to get your question. I believe it was that the federal government was requiring us to adopt the Common Core in order to apply for waivers. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, again, let me kind of clarify that. We are not required to adopt the Common Core to receive waivers for No Child Left Behind. Oklahoma, like every state that will be considered, and not every state will get the waiver, but Oklahoma was invited to be an early applicant for these because of our aggressive reforms that we are producing.
Did we not do these
But-
aggressive reforms because we were trying to get rest of the top money?
Ma'am, most of these are reforms that this legislature passed last year.
Yes, ma'am, I know.
Okay. And so that was after the race to the top was presented. But if you read the application, it says that every state that wants to apply it has to adopt nationally benchmarked rigorous standards that are focused on college and career ready. And I'm sorry, I can't remember B and C.
Homegrown curriculum, 15%.
Okay, let's get back to that again. It's a curriculum, not a standard. And so the curriculum that brings that standard to life, that develops the instructional strategies that that teacher will use within that classroom can be developed locally within the framework of the standards. We can add 15% onto those standards, but the curriculum that is taught within the district is developed within the district. Oklahoma City Public Schools and Tulsa Public Schools are using a curriculum called ACT America's Choice. They are still using the guidelines or transitioning to the Common Core. Does that help?
Not really, but I think you're making too much of a distinction between curriculum and standards that somebody in the water, but America's Choice is not, from what I hear from different teachers, is not aligned to our past standards, and therefore our students are not doing as well. We're requiring a program, using the program, but our standards aren't, past standards are not aligned to that, and so our students are doing very poorly. We need to have programs that align together, so, but that's,
Well, if you look at our
We're
past
getting
standards.
into debate now, and we just want
Yeah.
questions and answers.
Okay, you
please.
bet, you bet. Question, part C.
Part C, okay, well, yes, teacher skills.
What it does is the Common Core, as I said, presents content and presents development of cognitive skills. And so the teachers are able to develop instructional strategies or learn instructional strategies that utilizes the presentation of both content as well as development of cognitive skills. So more the Socratic method is used, and teachers are actually learning how to incorporate those things together and lead that question and answer, lead those debates. They're getting instruction in how to work with their students on writing skills across subject matter. Those are the kinds of things that teachers say are exciting and engaging their students, and they feel very positive about it.
That's what I was
I'm going to ask you to get back at the queue. if you
One
will.
short question.
No, because we have other questions, and because I've just been informed that we have another presentation.
Yes, I apologize.
And I'm sorry
We
that
do
I
have
went
another
to questions before that, so
You bet.
if it'll be all right with you, could we have our other
Absolutely.
presentation, and then we'll
Yes.
come back to these questioners. Thank you. And who is our presenter?
Apologize. Stacy Reeder and Sally Beach from the University of Oklahoma.
All right, Stacy Reeder and Dr. Sally Beach. We're so glad to have you from OU, and we'll welcome the presentation now.
Thank you. We'll just take a few minutes of your time to talk a bit about the Common Core standards and our understanding of the development of those and the implementation, much of which has been talked about today. So I'm Stacy Reeder, mathematics educator at the University of Oklahoma. And I'd also like to add, too, that I'm a native Oklahoman. So when we talk about Oklahoma values, I really understand what that means and what our concerns are with that and where those are coming from. Also a product of public education and a former public school teacher of mathematics. So much of what I'll talk about today, I'll try to embed in that context.
And I'm Sally Beach, and I am not a native Oklahoman. I came to Oklahoma 20 years ago for a job at the University of Oklahoma and have stayed because it's such a great place to be. I am also a former teacher, 10 years in elementary schools, including teaching in the Department of Defense schools overseas. So I have an international background as well.
Okay, we do have a PowerPoint. We're not going to read that PowerPoint, but we'll hope that the comments and the bullet points there are supplemental to what we're going to say. I suppose I'm supposed to click this. Aha, that's how that works. Okay, I'd like to shed just a little bit of light, at least my perspective and my experience with how the Common Core standards came to be. I can only talk about the mathematics ones, of course, because that's what I was involved in, and then Sally will shed a bit of light on the language arts. We've had national standards for a long time. This is not a new idea or a new thing that's coming our way. I've been a member of the National Council of Teachers of Mathematics since I began as a pre-service teacher in my undergrad program in the late 1980s. That was about the time that the first set of national standards were published. It was in 1989. Prior to that, NCTM had been on the national scene for almost 100 years with the goal of improving mathematics education, mathematics learning for all children in the U.S. When those national standards were first published, it was a really exciting idea and an exciting prospect to think that we had a guideline as teachers. So teachers that might be the single mathematics teacher in a small school like Depew, Oklahoma, where my husband went to high school, the algebra teacher there might then have a guideline that was similar to a teacher, let's say, at Norman High, who was working with other teachers at the time. That was an exciting prospect. So when students left a variety of schools, there was a common expectation that they'd been exposed to the same ideas, the same standards, and so on. NCTM republished those standards again in 2000, some revisions. We've talked a bit about that revision process. We expect there will be the same kind of revision process with the Common Core. And then in 2006 began to really develop what they call the focal points. And so they began to say, instead of having this really broad set of standards that are sort of narrow, how can we focus on critical key ideas that students need to develop understanding of at each grade level? That document fed in, and much of the wording is the same for the Common Core standards. So when the Common Core standards were developed for mathematics, it brought together members from NCTM, which include teachers, mathematics educators, and for the first time, a large body of mathematicians to help maintain the rigor and make sure that we had content and rigor in those standards. We were also, as NCTM members and the public at large, given an opportunity to provide feedback on those standards. They were sent out via mass email, an internet site set up, and was open for 4 months for feedback. All of my students at OU were invited to provide feedback, and all teachers that I work with. So there was a lot of input on those standards, critique, edit, revisions at the public level, if people were willing to participate. So that's my perspective on how the math came to be.
And the literacy ones in the same way, the International Reading Association, the National Council of Teachers of English as well, which covers across not only teachers in K-12, but higher education faculty as well. Also, the Literacy Research Association, which is the premier body of literacy researchers, sent out the Common Core standards for input across all of the faculties of researchers in the U.S.
Yeah, so I mentioned we thought what we might do here is just share some examples and how we see the implementation of these standards or focus on these standards might play themselves out in the classroom. So I mentioned before that NCTM began to focus on key concepts that students should learn at each grade level. We see that also in the Common Core standards, and I think that's actually really exciting because not only do we have sort of this open, we can add 15%, But now the standards say at first grade, these are the key concepts students should know. At second grade and so on. In algebra, these are the big ideas we should focus on. That leaves a lot of room for teachers to actually focus on that and go really deep, rather than sort of this birdshot sort of, just hitting at a lot of things and going really shallow with them. So, for example, I think we've all come to know that algebra and being successful in algebra is sort of the golden key to everything else after that. A lot of careers are based on students' ability to be successful in algebra. And of course, college, entering into college and being successful in those math courses depend greatly on algebra. So as a former middle school teacher, I was keenly aware of that. In a typical 7th grade classroom with our current standards, we had a lot of stuff to cover. With the Common Core, that list is going to be a bit smaller, so I could spend a lot of time developing through problem solving, depth with my students on fractions, decimals, and percents, those things that we know are key for success in algebra. I actually liked the example earlier that was presented, the Lake Michigan example, because I think for students to be able to answer that, there's a significant amount of mathematics thinking that has to occur and a lot of calculation, like for example, how much mass does the average person have? What's the population? How are we going to put those people in there? What the surface area question and all that? Those are the kinds of things I think that the Common Core standards are going to allow us to spend some time on and teach the mathematics skills and concepts through problem solving. So we're aiming for something better and something beyond proficiency.
In terms of the literacy example that is most important to me, I think you've all heard of the 4th grade slump. That's when kids get into 4th grade, hit those content areas where there's a lot of reading that has to be done, in the social studies especially, even in the sciences. Part of the reason, and as an elementary teacher who taught in grades 1 through 5 over the course of my teaching career, one of the reasons that that occurs is we're really good with stories with children in the primary grades. They get great at understanding how stories work and those comprehension strategies that you would use to understand a story. But when you get into informational text, those of you who are social studies people or science people, reading a science text is different. Reading a history text is different. Reading an economics text is different. The structure of the text is different than thinking skills that you have. So one of the things that I find especially good about the Common Core standards is we start looking at informational text from the very beginning. Another thing that the informational text does is a lot of children are interested in finding out about how their world works. You don't find out necessarily how the world is put together through reading a story. A story tells you how we all get along with each other, how people live their lives, but they aren't going to tell you how plants grow, how machines work, and so informational text is an important piece. The other thing that has a bigger emphasis in the Common Core standards is writing, and writing for multiple purposes and multiple audiences, so that kids learn how to do research. They learn how to present an argument with appropriate evidence on how to present that argument. Why my evidence, here is my argument about what you should do, and here's the evidence from the facts, using the content, using the concepts that I've learned in science, social studies, economics, health, mathematics.
And this next slide is a chart we're going to pop up here just a couple of times. We're going to focus though on those front bars, the blue bars, that look at clarity and specificity, comparing the past document, our current standards, with the Common Core, and just for language arts and math, of course. One of the things you'll notice is that Common Core scored lower. That's really a good thing for the first time, because what we were looking at was that specificity. So if we're interested in local control and how we implement and having freedom and how we implement and how we meet the standards, that curriculum development piece, regardless of maybe the textbooks we're using or curriculum materials, but how I get to teach that, how I get to meet my students' needs in my classroom, that's a good thing, that there's more openness. And so what we hear from some of the critics for Common Core standards is that there are holes in the Common Core standards. I like to refer to those as opportunity. I like that the standards are a little less specific, because that allows me as a teacher to look at where my students are, use formative assessment, and make those changes and implement them in ways that are meaningful for my students. We have a couple of other quotes here besides the graph. Again, this one states, local teachers, principals, superintendents, and others will decide how the standards are to be met. I think that's a critical importance today. And then, of course, we've talked, I don't need to kind of bring this or mention this too much anymore, but we do have that 15% to be, that can be augmented. So in addition to how we can meet the standards that are specified, we do have 15% of the content that we can add to, as of course the Arizona representative mentioned they're doing.
One of the most important things I think that comes with Common Core standards is the fact that we know that it's not curriculum that teaches students, it's teachers that teach students. And one of the things that I think goes into local control so importantly is this provides the opportunity for data-driven decisions in the classroom and in the school. The quotes that are up there, and that will be actually on the next slide as well, talk about how the importance of data-driven instruction, and that means the formative assessments that Stacy mentioned, assessments that teachers do in the classroom as you're teaching, after you're teaching, not the standardized tests, but the ones that say, okay, my goal is I wanted you to learn these particular kinds of ways of thinking about text. How do you find out about character motivations, for example, in a narrative text? As I'm having you do authentic kinds of activities, examining books that I, the teacher, have chosen, not some curricular material expert that says this is the book that should be read, but here's the books that are appropriate for my students based on their interests. We can have that discussion. A group of children doesn't meet the standard, I can move forward with those that do, I can reteach with those that don't. It's the data-driven decision-making in the classroom because it's the teacher that's the most important. Nowhere in the standards does it tell me this is how I have to teach, this is the book I have to read, this is the curriculum materials I have to choose. That's the decision of local control within the school districts. It's both of those related to studies. We also wanted to point out in the fact that the Common Core standards in that middle section on content and rigor are more rigorous in terms of than the PAC skills are. So we have higher expectations of the knowledge that our students will have. That's content, that's thinking skills, it's the ability to use the content. Content by itself is not enough. Children have to be able to use the content in situations that are different than the ones in which they learn the content. We also wanted to address the ACT longitudinal data and academic research and point out to you that the Common Core standards are consistent with the ACT's longitudinal research that empirically looked at identifying knowledge and skills that were essential for success in post-secondary education. So that might address the notion of are they correlated? Are the two correlated? ACT did a longitudinal study, looked at what were the skills that were successful, made a list of those based upon gathering data from across the country from different institutions and made a list of those, and then it was the Common Core standards. They used part of that research that looked at what progression should be there. The report card on workforce report card deficiency list, you'll notice that business employers want people who can communicate in writing, are critical thinkers and problem solvers, can communicate orally, comprehend what they read, and can have teamwork and collaboration. They also want professionalism and work ethic, which I think that's a value that we in Oklahoma have. These are the deficiencies that are found in high school graduates. The Common Core standards address most of those deficiencies with more of a focus on written communication, more of a focus on critical thinking and problem solving, oral communication, comprehension, and collaboration as well.
And this is exactly what I was talking about earlier. This concept of less is more, and Janet Barresi just a few moments ago, of course, mentioned that the curriculum has constantly in the U.S. been criticized for being very broad and very narrow. And we were commenting that this phrase, a mile wide and an inch deep, no one even cites who came up with it because it's such a catchphrase that we talk about and criticize our curriculum. We're trying to teach too many concepts, so we resort to a drill and kill sort of practice model and aim for proficiency and efficiency with those skills. But it's no good to have something memorized if you're not sure what to do with it. And I think that's where we're resting pretty solely right now, particularly in mathematics. So I think from my perspective, and I think many of my colleagues across the nation would agree, is that the Common Core standards have left room for us to focus on less and do a better job with it. And to teach the skills that students need. We still need students to know their math facts. I'm not saying that we don't need people to have all of that memorized. We don't need to be dependent on calculators and those sorts of things. But how we come to know those is where the power is. So I learn those math skills while I'm thinking, while I'm problem solving, and then I can use them in very flexible ways. Then I'm going to be successful in all aspects of school, work, life. So I was pleased when the Common Core standards came together and we had much smaller lists. It leaves tremendous room for us to implement them in ways that make sense for us in the classroom, in the district, and in the state.
I would echo that because in terms of reading skills, yes, you have to know how to decode a text. Yes, you have to know how to look at word parts and figure it out. But the ultimate of it is that if you don't know what to do with that once you have it, you can't read beyond word calling. You can say the words, but you can't understand what the whole idea the author is trying to get across. And especially we're talking about supporting good citizenship. Our citizens need to be able to read, think critically about what they're reading, look at the evidence that's presented on both sides, and make their decisions.
Thank you so very much, Dr. Reeder and Dr. Beach, for presenting to us today. And now we'll go back to our questions, and these questions may be of either Dr. Reeder, Dr. Beach, or Dr. Barresi. So we already have some folks in the queue, so we will start with representative candidate. Let me just say this. I'd like for you to ask your question. You may have one brief follow-up if you'd like. Then you'll have to get back in the queue because our time is getting short. Representative candidate.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dr. Barresi, you mentioned that 40 schools are currently using the Common Core. And let me preface my question this way. I'm going out to staff development meetings in the district, in Haskell County and so forth, and I'm hearing a lot of frustration about that transition and the rollout, okay? I guess the question I have for those 40, could you share with us how are they making that transition while they're still being held accountable to CRTs and pass criteria?
Thank you. Pardon me. Thank you very much for that question. And that also goes to Representative Holland's question about transition from the state. First of all, this was an effort that actually those 40 districts began over a year ago before I even took office, because quite frankly, they felt that they had no support, no guidance on this line, and actually got together and began the very difficult work of unwrapping the standards and making sure that they developed a curricula within their districts that brought those standards forward. So self-initiated, kudos to them for the hard work that they did, and we are drawing upon their experience also as we go forward. The state Department of Education initiated a communication network that we have initiated. We're really excited about it because it's already showing bonuses. It's called the REACH Network, and that's an acronym that's related to implementation truly of all of the reforms that this legislature has passed, but particularly surrounding the Common Core. And so from that, we are transmitting information out to member districts. We thought we'd be lucky if we got a total of 50 districts to volunteer for this, and we had volunteers of over 200 districts that were very excited about being in this. So we've come down to, I believe it's about 72 districts representing rural and urban and suburban schools as well as charter schools. And so we're giving them information on a regular basis throughout the year with formal meetings, and then periodically with toolkits that they can have about transitioning to the Common Core. And as I said, all the information about all of the wonderful reforms that this legislature has passed and is now in implementation. They will then turn around, they have agreed to being part of this group, they will turn around and transmit that information in a cascade effect to their districts. In addition, we are going to begin, we've already begun professional development opportunities throughout the state this summer. We have regional conferences, it was included in master teacher programs, and then also, as you all are well aware, as I'm sorely aware of quite the disturbance that we had with Pearson testing. Well, we're currently negotiating with them a settlement under the contract, and we'll get back to you on the details of that, but it will include both instructional supports surrounding implementation of the Common Core that will be free to the state, as well as a cash settlement. And I'm going to be using 99% of that money around professional development for transition in two areas, teacher and leader effectiveness and the Common Core. In terms of testing, I know that's a big thing. We've been very clear to districts that they are going to be held accountable for pass until the final date of implementation. However, we're seeing a need to show that bridging, to develop a bridge, if you will. And so one of those things we're negotiating into that settlement with Pearson, and that they have already agreed to, is that this year on this spring's test, that two performance questions that will be along the model of what they will be seeing in the common assessments will be included in our state's test. Those are performance items. We have not been able to afford those types of items before. Those will be included free of charge to the state, giving teachers a flavor of the kind of questions that will be coming down to them. Certainly they won't be held accountable for that, but it's just to kind of present that, and we'll do that increasingly until we do transition to Park. We're trying to create a bridge effect, if you will. Also, part of that settlement will be free writing prompts that teachers can use within their classrooms, again, free of charge, available to the whole state, to increase those writing skills of those students within the framework of what your presenters just told you about, that will be graded using artificial intelligence, and then so teachers can get the results back on those writing prompts very, very quickly. And again, giving them a flavor of what's coming ahead, helping them to prepare their students. So we're doing a gradual transition, lots of support from the State Department of Education, and we're just really in the big effort of pushing that information out to do what we can to support those districts.
Thank you. Representative Roberts for a question.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm very interested in this program. That it seems like it can really help rural schools develop with math and everything, put them geared more towards higher ed. What are the 40 school districts? Can we list them?
We'll get that to you right after the meeting, the exact list.
Follow up, Madam. Follow up.
Yes.
How does higher ed feel about this program? Are they on board with it?
I'm going to put Dr. Deborah Stewart on the line and ask her to come up. She's representing the regions for higher education. I'll ask her to come up and comment on that.
All right. But what I'm most interested in the program is it seems like it's allowing the teacher to actually teach what they need to know to be in the classroom in the fourth grade or the fifth grade instead of how to get into the fourth grade from the third grade. That's why I'm really interested in this.
Dr. Stewart.
And what we're really interested in is that more students are ready for college. The big hope of this conversation is that we close the gap in the curriculum between high school and college, we reduce remediation rates, and graduate more students from college. We know we have a heavy role in that once they get to college, they're our responsibility. We could do a better job of remediating them. We could also make sure that our teachers are ready. It's not just the schools of education, though, that prepare the teachers. They're going to teach this because at any point in time, only about 10% of the teachers are new. So we got to get all the teachers that are already out there ready for this curriculum. I'm the higher ed lead in Oklahoma for the PARC assessments. And I have involved our faculty in that, and we will continue to get them involved, but they're very excited about this also.
Thank you. Representative Casey for a question.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Barresi. First of all, I just wanted to get that email list of those 50 schools too, if they just want to go back over staff and email that list.
We will get that to every member, certainly.
So I guess my question is give me some feedback on your own staff development you're doing with school administrators right now, because with what Representative Kennedy, that's kind of the feedback that I've gotten to. There's a lot of frustration. How do you feel that's going?
Oh, and that's what the beauty of the REACH network is. We had our initial meeting, formal meeting. We have 2 dates. We have one date for rural districts, and then we have another date for urban and suburban districts, as well as charter schools. And I can tell you that we asked them to actually sign a memorandum of understanding, making sure that they understood their role in this, they understood our role in this, and that we laid out our responsibilities with each other. We have had overwhelming response to that. I think maybe we've had one district that says, you know, we're going through so much changes in leadership in our district, we just can't put the focus on it. But I can tell you those superintendents that have talked to us and the teachers that have come and their senior staff that have come have been very excited about the opportunity and the support that we're giving them along those lines.
Thank you. Representative McDaniel for a question.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'll be brief. I've drawn a diagram. I think I have it right, Dr. Barresi. We've got PASS and CRT, then we have a bridge called REACH, and parks on the other side. Is that sort of
Great analogy.
Well, I mean, I say that and thank you to Dr. Beach and Ms. Reeder, because I have teachers who don't want to teach the whole book because they're missing basic blocks and they don't have enough time to spend on the blocks because the test at the end of the year is going to be on whole book. So they'll come to me and say, I need more time to spend on basic foundations or they're going to fail next year in Algebra 2. And it's mostly AP teachers I'm actually hearing this from, and it's in math. And so are the tests that we're reaching for, are they going to reflect allowing teachers to do this, or are we going to have the old test? I mean, that's what I worry about. I have teachers wanting to go deeper into the blocks they need, but the tests, unfortunately, don't reflect what they're trying to teach. So is this going to solve that problem?
Yes, as we're transitioning, we're trying very hard to hit that tough mark to hit, because I want to emphasize teachers are being held to pass standards right now, which is a mile wide and an inch deep. But one of the things that we know in order for a young person to be successful in mathematics later on is they have to have a firm grasp of fractions. And our past standards currently don't permit teachers to go deeply into that because there is so much they have to cover. And again, the Common Core allows those teachers to spend more time on that critical area. Same thing for reading in terms of technical reading skills. It provides them to go deeper into that and to develop those technical reading skills. And so our desire to, as we know, as we work with districts on their own implementation of the Common Core and our support for them, is to let them know that while state law requires that they're going to be held to pass, that we want to do as much as we can to provide them as much information as possible so they can understand, first of all, how to teach within the classroom. Inquiry skills, writing skills are very important in this. Abstract reasoning, synthesis, analysis of information. That's the luxury you have with the Common Core. We don't have that luxury of time with our state pass standards.
I guess my follow-up would be is they think they know this already, but they've gone back to having to do the PASS and CRT. So I have confidence that they're going to be able to do what we want them to do. I think they've been frustrated with what they've had to do.
I can just tell you, when we have a chance to interact with them and do professional development, they get very excited. And one thing is, a lot of people, when you use the word rigor, they think it means harder. It's more rigorous, it's not harder. And that's because of the development of cognitive skills in this.
Representative Holland for a question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And just as a side note, it's things like this that just make you feel proud to live in a country where we can have one group stand up and passionately argue, and then another be on the complete opposite side, and we're all able to get along. I think that's a good thing. I think this would probably be more appropriate for the two doctors, professors from OU. From your experience, were the standards developed from the out going in, or from the in going out? And by what I mean by that is, what I see is I think the state has priorities and needs. I think industry has needs, and maybe they communicate those to the higher ed system. I would hope, and the higher ed system would communicate, well, this is what we need from the high school, this is what we need from junior high on down. So I'm asking you, your perspective, which way were these set up? From the needs down to the elementary, or from the elementary? And here's my question, because what we hear in education circles, if you ask a high school kid or teacher, they'll say, well, they were this way when I got them. It's their fault. And then you ask the fifth grade, they say, well, it's the fourth grade teacher. And we're constantly pointing down. So I think it's important how these are set up, addressing that.
Well, I think my understanding of how they were developed, I don't know it's exactly in line with what you're asking, but it definitely involved people at all levels. So if you think about an organization like NCTM, the National Council of Teachers of Mathematics, it involves mathematics teachers at all levels, K-12, higher ed representatives, mathematicians, people from industry. Those were all brought to the table. But I think, and I agree with you wholeheartedly, you know, as a middle school teacher, I can always blame the elementary teachers. As a high school teacher, I can blame the middle school. I think implementation is where a lot of that happens. It's difficult sometimes to say, we're gonna go with whatever curriculum materials, or we're going to go with these new standards, but we're going to start and grow them from the first grade with a group of students. We do it across the board, which is why we have these bridging, you know, frustrations as we're trying to change the system all at once. So I don't think that really answers your question, except to say I think people were all at the table in the development of these.
And I think that's good. I think sometimes in the education circle, we need to be reminded we're all in the same family. I mean, we're all in this for kids, whether it's pre-K or higher ed. It ought to be about the kids. So I think the more we hold hands on those things, the better. This might sound like a weird question, but I'm always fascinated when I see a number. The 15% augmentation, to me, is an acknowledgement that there's going to be some states that have different priorities and things, so we're going to give them the flexibility of 15%. Where did that number come from? Why not 10? Why not 20?
I have no idea. I agree with you. Yeah, I mean, at some point, you just have, a number has to be set, and who knows whether they said, it should be 10, let's make it more, can't be 20. I don't know where that number came from. So the nice thing is there is that room. I'm glad it's not less than 10. 15% is a good amount, I think, that we could do some stuff with. But I would say in that other 85%, the fact that it's not so outlined exactly what those objectives are. I mean, we certainly have goals and objectives, but there's a lot of room for, again, how we teach, so the curriculum, the enactment of what we do in the classroom with students. But then we've always had choice in our curricular materials. We can pick whatever textbooks, and we definitely decide that at the local level. So we can teach how, I can teach how I want regardless of the textbook. So there's a lot of space there.
And I also think we need to look at the state core standards as this is what we want as a minimum for everybody. So as a teacher, if I have a group of kids that already exceed the standards for, let's say, third grade, I can continually move, extend, expand, because I have that freedom to do that. So they can already read what it says they're supposed to be able to read. They already know the concepts related to analyzing text. They can write a variety of different kinds of texts that are appropriate for third grade. Why shouldn't I extend and expand and let them go on and go beyond that? Should I not do fourth grade work? What is fourth grade work? And so I think what that does is tell me, here's where I want them to be, and I can keep them moving forward.
Thank you. Representative Blackwell for a question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Appreciate that. Two questions.
Yes.
The first one, both will be to Dr. Barresi. The first question is, I have heard that there will be 4 more tests administered on Common Core by Pearson testing. Given the statement that they are putting 2 more questions in, which we couldn't afford before, how much more, the question is, will the cost of the new tests be about the same, slightly higher, or significantly higher?
Well, first of all, a vendor has not been declared by the Department of Central Service for that test. If it is given to Pearson, and I don't know if it is or not, we have negotiated that questions be placed inside of our state tests at no charge to the state. Did I answer your question?
Well, I'm projecting out 2 or 3 years when they're no longer bound by lawsuit settlements, that if we had a test that is totally Common Core, would that cost be about the same as we're presently paying?
Right, we're still working on developing those costs of the test, because in that test, it really is an apples and oranges comparison to what we're doing right now, because teachers are asking for a beginning test at the beginning of the year, and then one that is a formative nature about November. Then what we're looking at in order to get results back to districts before the end of the year, Park is considering doing the performance items, all of the writing items, all of the math items that require a student to show their work and to show their reasoning behind their math. They're looking at administering that in February, and then right at the end of the, so those results will be back before the end of the year, a critical thing that currently isn't being done in the state. And then right before the end of the year, the multiple choice test that will have more items than just a depth of knowledge test, than just a recall part, that will be administered at the end of the year. And so every one of the states are talking about the costs of those items. Every single state involved in Park have discussed their concern, making sure that this price tag does not go up. And look at the amount of money per student that is spent on testing per states. Very honestly, Oklahoma's in the lowest quartile of that. And so, and other states are way above the number that we're looking at. So what we're all saying is we have to make this affordable within our states and realistically. And I'm in there at the top of the committee talking about that constantly. This has to be within a realistic budget as we go forward.
And could I ask you just to clarify or answer with the one
Yes,
word
you may.
answer that we're
Just
not
one
council
last-
call?
one last
You
one.
mentioned 2 tests there instead of 4, so are we looking at 2 tests per year instead of 4?
Well, actually, right now we have one test at the end of the year, okay? And that is administered in the window, during the window in March. And I'm talking about, let me make sure I'm clear, this is 3 through 8 examinations and then 5 and 8 writing. So this is, it is one test at the end of the year. What the teachers have asked for, what educators have asked for, is a baseline test at the beginning of the year to assess what children know, then a test that is more formative in nature to be administered sometime in November, and I'm kind of talking not with certainty because that hasn't been determined. And then in order to be able to get the results back, take the end of the year summative test, break it up into 2 tests, so the performance items that require human scoring will be back before the end of the year. And then they're saying they can get the multiple choice scoring back within, I believe, 2 weeks. It's all so educators can get the information back.
Okay, then my follow-up question is, besides the 40 schools, I'd be interested in the REACH network, because I've also talked to several superintendents, I believe, that are in that network that have expressed the same confusion and frustration with the implementation at this point. So if that persists, is the timeline for implementation subject to change, or to achieve what we want with this, is it necessary to stay on that timeline to implement it by 2014?
Well, as you know, we have several years to do that, and we're focused very much on that, not just with the REACH network, that's a communication network, but then also with all of the work we're doing as a department in terms of professional development. A lot of this a lot of this is district-led, how much the districts want to participate in this. We're very excited to make that available to them, and many of the districts do participate in that, but some decide for one reason or another not to participate. So the REACH network has just begun. We know how critical it is to get information out. And so whatever frustration is being transmitted to you by those superintendents that might have attended that meeting, we'll be happy to talk to them and find out, but we've had nothing but very positive remarks. As a matter of fact, I had one superintendent that just said it really cleared up, and he's from your area of the state. I don't know if he's from your district, but he said that prior to this, he had a great deal of confusion, a great deal of misgivings, and now he said he's wholly on board and he's pretty excited about it. So,
Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Reynolds for a question.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Well, we've heard a lot today. I guess we've heard that we're remediating in college. We all know that. Probably one of the best things to help the standards would be for kids to know they're not going to get remediated in college. You're going to have to pass in high school to get there. That'll probably solve a lot of the problems. But we've heard about one of the key things is data-driven decisions. But in my mind, the data has been severely lacking today. And I'm just wondering, for example, we saw a graph up here that had 2 and 3 and 5 and 7, no underlying data where that came from, just a nice, pretty graph. And I'm wondering if Stacy or Sally would like to say, where was the data to arrive at that graph so that we can see that little bit of information?
I'll apologize for Stacy, who had to go teach a class, and I'll ask my assistant who got the chart.
To address the question, it is cited in the bottom right-hand corner of that graph, Carmichael et al., 2010. It is a review by the Ford Institute rating all of the standards across the 50 states and the District of Columbia and the Common Core standards.
Thank you.
And it is available in that report.
Appreciate that. And my follow-up actually pertains to a different subject. I heard the superintendent say that there was going to be an independent effort for the dollars this year. I'm wondering if you could clarify for us what you mean by an independent effort for the dollars.
I can't remember in reference to what. Are you talking about for professional development and supporting professional development implementation?
I believe someone asked the question, will there be additional funding required to implement this year?
Yeah.
And you said there's an independent effort for those dollars and we won't ask the legislature for it.
Right, we're not doing that, and some of the money that we're using is probably going to be from that settlement from Pearson. That will contribute to it as well. Plus, we're going to be taking a look at funding we have right now for professional development in the department. When I got in the department, I did an overview of all the dollars spent on professional development and found some of it to be lacking and ineffective. So we're taking a look at present budgeting for professional development and focusing in on implementation of Common Core, as well as all of the other reforms that have been passed, particularly in teacher and leader effectiveness.
Thank you. And now for our final question, Representative Kerr.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dr. Barresi, this question is for you, please. You said a statement earlier when you started your presentation that I agree with wholeheartedly, and it was that the person is entitled to their own opinion and not to their own facts, and I certainly agree with that. So what I would like to ask of you, if you would please, I'm sure you have a copy of the presentation of my two presenters. I would appreciate very much if you would, because I want to know this issue and I want to make the right decision, I would appreciate it very much if you would go through there and show me where the facts have been wrong. Would you do that for me, please?
Sure, and I'll get it back to you.
Thank you, appreciate it.
All right, I just want to thank everyone who has presented today. We're not through now, we're not through. Because I do want you to have an opportunity to wrap up this particular section as I gave the opportunity to Representative Kern. You want to wrap up? No, she's already done it. She's already done it.
I'll just be very brief. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be with you today. Ladies and gentlemen, Oklahoma is on the road to reform. I am so very proud of the work that this legislature has undertaken in the major reforms. This is about preparing Oklahoma's kids to go toe-to-toe against every other child in the United States of America, and for that matter, for the world. This is the chance for Oklahoma to be a leader. If we're going to do that, we have to embrace standards. We have to embrace teaching practices. We have to embrace accountability. We have to embrace transparency in order to do that, in order to move forward. If we remain with our past standards, this state, in order to get there, is going to have to undertake major update, major reforms of our past standards to meet with those goals of college, career, and citizen ready. I don't think the state can afford the level of revision that we have to do to our existing past standards to get to where we need to be to prepare every Oklahoma child for the rigors of the 21st century, to make every child competent in the knowledge economy. And I appreciate the chance to speak with you today. We stand ready, I stand ready as an individual, and the department stands ready to answer any questions that you have going forward.
Thank you so much, Dr. Barresi, and I do want to thank every single person who presented today. You have worked very hard to do these presentations, and our committee thanks you very much. I know that there are a lot of questions, and I'm certain that anyone who presented today would be happy to answer those questions if you would seek them out. I think you have their names on the handouts that you've received, so please don't hesitate to contact any one of these presenters or any one of the people who have been here for questions that you might have. Thank you for your patience, and I want to remind you that we do have to be back at 1:30 committee because we have a presentation coming to us from Representative Forkiller regarding health. So we'll see you all at 1:30. Thank you.